Welcome to the NTEB Prophecy News Podcast with your host and Bible teacher, Jeffrey Greider. Rightly divided, dispensationally correct, and standing on the authority of the King James Holy Bible. This program is brought to you by NowTheEndBegins.com.
And good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this edition of the Prophecy News Podcast. My name is Jeff Greider. I am the editor-in-chief of NowTheEndBegins.com, and today, the shocking Christmas Day bombing in Tennessee has already given rise to any number of fascinating conspiracy theories as to who was really behind it and why they chose to do it on Christmas morning. But you may be surprised to learn that many times over the last 100 to 120 years, these type of events have taken place, and they all have one thing in common. They are a necessary distraction to what is actually going on behind the scenes, and events like the stock market crash of 1929, the assassination of JFK in 1963, and the targeted attack on the World Trade Center in 2001 were all done deliberately to move society forward into the New World Order. On this episode of the NTEB Prophecy News Podcast, we are going to show you how the global elites use false flag events, predictive programming, and mass hysteria to effect change within society and to move people forward to a bleak and dystopian future. Bible prophecy shows us a lost world rushing to embrace the soon-coming Antichrist, and even right now, in the waning days of 2020, it looks and it feels like the world is coming off its hinges and headed for disaster. Well, that's because that's exactly what's happening. That's what you're watching. That's what's taking place in front of your very eyes. Habakkuk chapter 1 verse 5, Behold ye among the heathen, and regard, and wonder marvelously, for I will work a work in your days, which ye will not believe, though it be told you. On today's program, we're going to take a deep dive into the Tennessee Christmas Day bombing and show you what's behind the curtain of that event and the other events that are soon to follow. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your goodness and your mercy. We thank you, Lord, for everything you do. And we commit this time to you, Lord, and we ask for your blessing. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so everybody is talking about the Christmas Day bombing, and I purposely stayed away from this story for the past 4 or 5 days because I wanted to see, well, actually the past 3 days. Well, it's only 3 days since Christmas? Wow. It seems like Christmas was 2 weeks ago. Man, time is speeding up. But I purposely stayed away from this story because I wanted to see how it was going to play out. I wanted to see what was going to be taking place. And let me just read to you some of the things that are being said about the Christmas Day bombing. I'm not saying that I necessarily believe these things, but it's interesting to see what other people are saying. Here's a random snippet that my friend Lewis from California sent me about a day or so ago. AT&T had a contract to do a forensic audit on Dominion voting machines, and those machines were being moved to Nashville this week. The former owner of the AT&T building in Nashville, Tennessee, a man by the name of William Kennard, is a board member for Cerberus Capital Management and AT&T. He was also Bill Clinton's FCC chairman and Obama's ambassador to the European Union. Dominion Voting is owned by Cerberus Capital Management. Cerberus is run by Staple Street executives. Joe Biden's brother-in-law, Stephen Owens, is the co-founder of Staple Street Executives along with William E. Kennard. Supercomputer in Tennessee was connected to AT&T Internet in Nashville, and then the Cumberland River cooling system was compromised due to an internet outage, and the supercomputer fried. Now, they are saying that the supercomputer that was fried was called Kraken, Kraken, the same name that Sidney Powell uses when she talks about releasing the Kraken, which we're all still waiting for that Kraken to be released. But I researched it, and there was a computer that AT&T used. It was started in 2009 and decommissioned in 2014, and it was called Kraken. So everything that I'm telling you so far, I have been 95% of it in just a quick Google search. I've been able to prove that all these things, these seemingly disconnected things that I'm telling you, when I researched it, it all turned out to be true. William E. Kennard is a board member for Cerebus Capital, and he was Bill Clinton's FCC chair and Obama's ambassador to the European Union. Where did I find that information? I found that information on the AT&T website. November 6th of this year, William E. Kennard was named the chairman of AT&T Board of Directors. So, the vast majority of this information that I'm giving you is verifiable, and it's true. The only question is does it connect to the bombing in Tennessee? So let's keep reading here. So then Lewis says that the explosion just happened to be at the AT&T location where they just so happened to control the cooling system for the supercomputer and house the Dominion voting machines and drives for the forensic audit. So, this information is seemingly linking together the bombing in Tennessee with the election, with the supercomputer, and that this explosion was done to get rid of all those things. Now, again, I'm not saying that I believe that connection. But what I am saying is that it's a very interesting connection. And the vast majority of those things that I just told you, they are true and accurate statements. The only question is does those things connect to the bombing on Christmas Day in Nashville, Tennessee? Right on the surface, it's very curious, of course, that out of all the places you could have bombed in Nashville, Tennessee, that they picked the AT&T building. And when things like that happen, Franklin Delano Roosevelt said, anytime you see something unusual or coincidental that takes place in politics, it was not coincidental at all. And FDR was telling us that everything that you see happening on the American stage has been planned. And there are no coincidences and there are no accidents. And I believe that statement 100%. So when we see these seemingly disconnected things and these seemingly random things, a lot of the times there's distraction going on and there's things happening behind the scenes. Now, I want to play this clip for you. I'm going to switch gears before we finish talking about the Christmas bombing in Tennessee. I want to play this clip for you from this movie Songbird, which was released to streaming on December 11th, okay? I want you to listen. A lot of you have already heard about this movie. Some of you have seen the movie. But I want you to listen to this trailer. This is the official trailer for the movie Songbird, and I want you to really pay attention to what you're about to hear, and then we're going to talk about it. The Songbird trailer, take a listen.
Good morning, Miss Garcia.
Good morning, sunshine. I miss you. I could kiss you right now.
Someday.
Curfew is now in effect. All unauthorized citizens must stay indoors.
Tensions rise as we enter the 213th week of lockdown.
A grim new reality emerges.
COVID-23 has mutated.
Beginning thermal scan. Thermal scan normal.
A horrifying new development
New
today.
data confirms the virus attacks the brain tissue.
Hey, whoa, I'm immune! I'm immune!
We're
worldwide death toll rises to over 110 million.
All infected Americans are being forced into quarantine camps.
Sarah. Sarah, what's going on?
Department of Sanitation.
Sarah, talk to me.
I think my neighbor has a fever.
It'll be so much easier if you just open the door. Mrs. Grant, you have visitors.
Sarah, please. Sarah, open that door. Sarah, do not open that door.
Beginning thermal scan. 3, 2, 1. Anomaly detected. Armed guards will be arriving in 4 to 6 hours. You must not attempt to leave your home, or you will be shot on sight.
This is my message to you. I know you're in there.
They're coming to let you go.
No. Sarah! Sarah!
Say goodbye to me.
Sarah, I'm not letting you give up.
This is my message
Sometimes we have to do things we don't want to survive.
I'm trying to save the one person left in my life that matters to me.
I can't help you. What you're talking about is illegal.
I'm here.
Every little thing gonna be alright. And remember, stay safe, sane, and sanitized.
Now, that was the official trailer for the movie Songbird, which was just released about 3 weeks ago on December 11th. Now, some of you know that for 6 years before I got saved, I was an actor in Hollywood, and I worked on a lot of big pictures. I worked on movies that cost tens of millions of dollars and had some of the biggest movie stars of the 1980s and the 1990s. So I know what it's like to work on a movie from start to finish, and I know how long that it takes to come up with story ideas and to really hash everything out, and how many dozens of iterations that you'll go through with any script in any movie, and all of the behind the scenes and the preparation work. I was a member of the Screen Actors Guild for 18 years. I was a member of the American Federation of Television and Radio Artists. I've acted on Broadway theater in dozens of TV commercials, and I've worked on dozens and dozens of movies, both in front of the camera and behind the camera. So believe me when I tell you I know a little bit about what it takes to bring a movie to the big screen. And for this movie to be released on December 11th, it usually takes, after you're done filming a movie, it usually takes anywhere between 3, 4, 5 months of what they call post-production to make everything right and to add the music and all the sound effects and all that stuff. So you're looking at anywhere from a 7-month to a 14-month timeline to bring a big budget movie like Songbird to the, well, not the big screen, because they made it for streaming. But the point is that this movie Songbird was released on December 11th as a finished, finalized product. So whatever timeline that you use and you want to say, well, we had a smaller crew, we had this, we had that, I get all of that stuff. It still takes 5, 6, 7, 8 months to bring this to light. So, you heard in that clip, they're talking about week number 213 of the lockdown and all these different things. And so, the vast majority of what is in that script, Songbird, was written either in the end of 2019 or in the first 2 or 3 months of 2020. Certainly, well in advance before the lockdowns would come and all these other different things would come. So everywhere you look, all around you, Hollywood is telling you that they're broadcasting what's going to be coming next. We have an entire section on our website for predictive programming, and I'll put the link into the chat room. But you can just go to news categories, assorted stories, and then slide down to the predictive programming section. And there you're going to find some very interesting articles and videos. You're going to see a video of the 2012 opening ceremonies for the London Olympics. And you're going to see how the entire thing is a COVID-19 predictive programming. And that took place 8 years ago. And the parallels are creepy, but they are undeniable. So one thing that you have to understand about the New World Order, the global elites, that they love to take their time and they love to tell you what's coming, and they're not in any type of a rush. I've played this clip before, but it certainly bears repeating. Take a listen to this 1981 episode, 13 years before the internet would be released to the public. There's no cell phones. There's no mobile phones. 1981 is a very, very different world. Completely different. And yet, in 1981, on an episode of a TV program called Barney Miller, we heard this.
They're the ones you should be arresting, not me.
Why don't you say that before? What do we got here? Cam, this is William Klein. He was wrecking an office.
But I just wanted to meet them face to face. I wanted them to admit what they were doing.
Who is they? He was in the office of the Trilateral Commission.
Trilateral Commission?
Yeah, the Trilateral Commission.
All right, what is the Trilateral Commission?
It's an organization founded in 1973 by David Rockefeller to bring together business and political leaders from the United States, Europe, Japan, so they could work together for better economic and political cooperation between their nations.
That's what they'd like us to believe. But you see, what they're really up to is a scheme to plant their own loyal members in positions of power in this country, to work to erase national boundaries and create an international community, and in time bring about a one-world government with David Rockefeller calling the shots.
I take it they're pressing charges?
Yeah, well, he broke a globe and some UNICEF artwork.
Well, they're in on it, too.
Okay, Mr. Klein, if you just...
I'm telling you, our whole way of life as we know it is in jeopardy.
I appreciate that information.
But I have the documented evidence. It's all in there. Show him.
Well, he's got these magazines here.
Conspiracy Review? Suppressed Truth Roundup?
The whole master plan is exposed.
Yeah, well,
You're still not convinced, huh? Would you like to hear the names of just a few of the people who have been on the Trilateral Commission?
Not particularly.
James Earl Carter. Heard of him?
Look, Mr. Klein...
Henry Kissinger. You heard of him? Walter Mondale.
Who?
Mr. Klein, this is
John Anderson, George Bush. Now, you remember at the convention, everybody thought it was going to be Ford for Veep. You know what happened? David Rockefeller just picked up a phone, put in a call. Hey, Ronnie, forget Jerry, it's George. Bye. So, no matter who won in November, they had their man in the White House.
Are you through?
So everybody had a good laugh. That's 1981. That's an episode of Barney Miller. I can recall watching that TV show when I was a teenager. I don't recall that particular episode, but suffice to say, in that short clip that I just played for you, they mentioned David Rockefeller. They mention George Bush, talking about George H.W. Bush. Well, 10 years from the time that clip was produced on the episode of Barney Miller in 1981, 10 years later, on September 11th, 1991, George H.W. Bush, as President of the United States, would stand up and announce the coming New World Order. The exact same thing that the crazy man in that clip on Barney Miller is trying to warn the cops that these people are working to bring about a one world government and a new world order. And 10 years later, George H.W. Bush, the same person referenced in that clip with David Rockefeller, stood up before Congress and said this.
This is an historic moment. We have in this past year made great progress in ending the long era of conflict and Cold War. We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders.
Now that's exactly what the crazy man on the episode of Barney Miller was so upset about. That's exactly what George Bush said before the Congress on September 11th, 1991, 10 years to the day that the Twin Towers would be intentionally brought down and not by Muslim terrorists. If you believe that Muslim terrorists brought down the Twin Towers, you need to be re-educated very quickly because they were not responsible for bringing those towers down. They were used as a distraction. They were used as cover. So whenever you're looking at events that don't take place, that don't make sense, the thing that you need to keep in your mind above everything else is that you're being shown a magic trick, okay? Have you ever been on a city street, like in downtown Manhattan on Fifth Avenue, and you see those street hustlers, and they do the 3-card Monte, they do the shell game where they have 3 shells and they put a P under one of the shells, and you got to guess as they move them around where the P is, and if you guess right, then you win money, but you never guess right. And the reason why you never guess right, why they always make money doing that, and why you never win at 3-card Monte, is because it's a game. It's an intentional hustle, and you can't follow it with your eyes because you're being distracted. Now, do you find it odd that on Christmas Day in America, the AT&T building would be blown up with a RV filled with explosives, that when the thing was parked in front of the building, a recorded message said, "Leave the area immediately," like it was a scene from The Hunger Games or some other movie like that? If you look at that and you're not having any red flags being triggered, if you're not sensing that there's something really, really wrong with what you're seeing, that's how they get over on you. Now, let me tell you just a couple of things that took place surrounding 9/11. All right? Did you know that George H.W. Bush's son and George W. Bush's brother, Marvin, he was in charge of security at the World Trade Center on a board of directors in a company funded by Kuwait. George W. Bush's brother Marvin was on the board of directors of a company providing electronic security for the World Trade Center, Dulles International Airport, and United Airlines. The company was backed by an investment firm, the Kuwait American Corp., also linked for years to the Bush family. The security company, formerly named Securicom and now Stratesec, is in Sterling, Virginia. Its CEO, Barry McDaniel, said the company had a completion contract to handle some of the security at the World Center up to the day that the buildings fell down. And this was Marvin P. Bush, who was leading the effort to keep the World Trade Centers safe 10 years to the day after his father stood up and he declared that a new world order was coming. He said, when we are successful, and we will be successful, and all of these things, according to Franklin Delano Roosevelt, none of these things are coincidences. None of these things happened by accident. And so when you look at something like 9/11 and you begin to put the pieces together, you see very, very quickly and very, very clearly that there is so much of what happened there that doesn't make any sense at all. And yet, people are basically lazy. They don't want to take time to figure it out. They don't want to look deeply into what they're seeing. And that's exactly what the New World Order is counting on. That's why Donald Trump has not been successful with his attempt to prove voter fraud. And sad to say, I am not happy about this. He is not going to be successful in overturning the election results, fraudulent as they are. I agree with that. They are absolutely fraudulent. They rigged the election. They stole the election. When they stopped the counting, that's exactly when the steal started taking place. But the Trump team had a timeline, and they did not do what they needed to do within that timeline, and now the tide of public opinion has turned against Donald Trump and his attempts to prove election fraud. Even the New York Post, which is an extremely conservative newspaper, even the New York Post on its cover the other day, maybe yesterday, on the cover of the New York Post, they have a picture of President Trump with really big 48-point type, and it says, "Stop the insanity. You lost the election." Now, he didn't lose it fair and square. The election was stolen from him. I agree with that. But when you have criminals who commit crimes, it is not the job of the criminal to turn themselves in. When a criminal commits a crime, it is the job of law enforcement to find a suspect, arrest a credible suspect, and then to bring that suspect to trial, to court, before a judge, before a jury of some kind, and to prove that that person, whoever is suspected of the crime, you have to present evidence to prove your case. And if you're unable to do that, that's how criminals go free. That's how defense attorneys make a lot of money. That's how O.J. Simpson went free. He absolutely killed Ron Goldman and Nicole Brown Simpson. He had the blood on his clothing. He had the blood-stained footprints inside his own house. He had their blood inside his vehicle, that white Ford Bronco. O.J. Simpson was as guilty as any person could ever be, and I watched every minute of that trial back in 1993, 1994, whenever it was. I watched just about every minute of that trial that I could watch, and it was beyond obvious that O.J. Simpson deliberately, maliciously, and intentionally killed those two people. But the problem is, you have to be able to prove your case. Donald Trump's team has not been able to prove their case. Donald Trump's team has been largely ineffectual. Jay Sekulow, Ted Cruz, who's the other guy? Rudy Giuliani, Sidney Powell, whoever you have, Lynn Wood. Now, I don't know if these people have set him up to take a fall. That would really be a conspiracy theory. But I do know this. I do know that the three handpicked people on the U.S. Supreme Court that Donald Trump directly placed on that bench, not a single one of those people are backing him in his attempt to bring this to the Supreme Court. Now, everybody's telling me that this big event's going to take place on January 6th, and they're going to have this thing where they're going to overturn the vote, and it's a it's a constitutional provision, and it's going to be put to the states, and each state gets one vote, and because there's more Republican states than Democratic states, that's how Donald Trump is going to eventually be successful. And all I can say is, if you don't look good in blue, then don't hold your breath waiting for this to happen. Nothing is going to take place on January 6th. Now, there may be a lot of people who show up in Washington. There may be another Trump rally. There may be a lot of excitement taking place on places like Breitbart.com and Gateway Pundit and all the other mainstream conservative Republican news outlets. But you're not going to find that translating into any sort of a tangible difference. January 6th is going to come and go. January 20th is going to arrive about a little less than 2 weeks later. And guess what? Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are going to become the next president of the United States, and you can't stop it. I don't want it. I'm not excited by it. I voted for Trump in 2016, and I voted for Trump in November. And I've written dozens and dozens of articles about Donald Trump. But at this point, you have to face facts, and you have to look at things logically. Look, I love conspiracy theory as much as anybody else, and I've talked about a lot of it in my time. But over the years, I have gradually begun to pull away from a lot of conspiracy theory, because back in the early days of Now the End Begins, when I was still in very much of a learning process, I was learning how to be a writer. I was learning how to be an editor. I was learning how to be a collaborator. And it takes a lot of time. And you've got to learn to get good at what you do. I believe that the Lord blessed me with a little bit of talent to do it. But even so, you still have to exercise your gift. And like anything else, it's a learning process. Now, I will say that in the year 2020, the reason why conspiracy theory is kind of fading away is because 2020 was such an explosive year that conspiracy theory is no longer theory. It's right in front of your face, and they're doing it openly, like with this movie Songbird, where they're showing you what the New World Order is doing. They're showing you that they've taken this real virus, but they have created this Trojan horse apparatus around it. And they're defying you. They're daring you to stop them. Now, we told you back in September about something called the Transition Integrity Project Group that was funded by George Soros for the Democratic Party, and it used a role-playing game that's similar to a military-style planning exercise, and concluded that there will be a very disruptive and lawless 11 weeks between Election Day and Inauguration Day. Tough word to say. And that's exactly what we've been seeing. I wrote this article on September 16th, and from the time that we had the election, I think it was November 5th, today is December 28th, things have been very disruptive. Things have been very lawless. Christmas Day bombing and explosion in Nashville, Tennessee. Black Lives Matter and Antifa stabbing people in Washington. And we've been telling you about all these things that have been taking place and things that have been going on. So the time between the election and the inauguration has absolutely been very disruptive and has been very lawless. But the Transition Integrity Project mapped all of this out months and months and months and months before the election ever took place. They realized what they did wrong in 2016. Now, of course, the main thing that they did wrong was not something that they could ever fix. God was the one who installed Donald Trump as president. It wasn't so much a failure of the Democrats. It was God wanted Donald Trump to be president. And in Daniel chapter 2, verse 21, and he changeth the times and seasons. He removeth kings and setteth up kings. He giveth wisdom to the wise and knowledge to them that know understanding. So it's God that puts people in power, and it's God who removes kings and presidents and leaders from power. And when they came to take Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, he looked at them and he said, now is your hour and the power of darkness. God put Donald Trump in from 2016 to 2020 to advance the timeline, to get some things done. And those things are accomplished. Donald Trump did what he was supposed to do. And now the restraints have been taken off. And now what are we going to see in 2021? Well, on our New Year's Eve broadcast this Thursday night from 10 to midnight Eastern Standard Time, we're going to go into that in very great detail. We're going to show you what this year was like. We're going to remind you of some things that you've forgotten about. And we're going to show you what is likely to come in the year 2021. But let me just give you a sample of what that program is going to be about. What's going to come in 2021 are going to be more Christmas Day bombings. That's what's going to come in 2021. You're going to see riots in the streets. You're going to see Antifa and Black Lives Matter. You're going to see a lot more bombings like what took place in Nashville, because the underpinnings of the United States are going to be pulled down. And that's what the New World Order has been planning for decades. And the time is now. And the time has arrived. So, did you know that during the 9/11, September 11, 2001, when the towers fell, and George Bush was sitting there watching a classroom read. It was a phonics exercise, and they were reading from a book called My Pet Goat, and it was an object reading lesson, and the teacher had them recite a series of words from that book. And these are the 5 words that the teacher repetitively asked the students to pronounce: kite, hit, steal, plane, must. That's the 5 words from My Pet Goat that the teacher that day had the students recite at the exact same time that George Bush was being told that the first tower had fallen. Now, what are the chances of that taking place? Very, 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 very small. But that's exactly what happened. And George Bush just sat there with this stupid look on his face. He had the look of somebody who was guilty beyond description. He didn't look like somebody who was mad. He didn't look like somebody who was angry at these Muslims who were destroying the very symbol of American financial dominance. Look at that look on his face. He is as guilty ever gets. And then when he was asked about it in the months and years that followed, he just hemmed and he hawed and he stuttered. He laughed and joked and made all sorts of awkward statements. But you go back to YouTube and you watch the video sometime of George Bush just sitting there with that stupid look on his face, and he's not opening his mouth. The Secret Service violated all sorts of protocol. What they should have done is instantly grabbed him and forcibly removed him from the classroom. The very lame excuse that they gave after everything was all said and done. They didn't want to frighten the kids, and they didn't want to cause a scene, and so he just sat there. And that is one of the most unbelievable things that I think I have ever heard in my life. that the idea that the President of the United States, when America was in the real-time process of sustaining a direct enemy attack, so-called, on the level of Pearl Harbor, 3,000 people died in Pearl Harbor and 3,000 people died in 9/11, roughly. Those aren't the exact numbers, but they're very, very close. And you want to tell me that the President of the United States, as his country is under attack and as the towers are falling, that they had the presence of mind to not follow protocol because they didn't want to upset a random classroom of school kids? Do you believe that? You would really have to be a special type of idiot to believe that. And if you believe that, and you're offended that I'm calling you an idiot, well, I don't take it back, because only a moron, only somebody who was either a crooked, corrupt person themselves or somebody who was mentally deficient would believe that the Secret Service would disobey protocol at the exact moment the United States was under attack and buildings were being brought down, and they didn't want to remove the president because it might upset school children. Well, if you believe that, that is why the New World Order is able to do what they do. And that is why they are able to do these things with absolute impunity. Because you see it, you don't believe it, and then you dismiss it, and you forget about it. Because you don't want it to interrupt your leisure time. You don't want it to interrupt your vacation time. You don't want to think about it because it's unsettling. And it makes you confused and angry and scared and afraid. So you push these thoughts from your mind, and it comes again and again and again and again. And they realize that they're able to do whatever they want to do. They realize, why do you think that they make you wear a mask? Now, I'm going to play this clip. This is from a YouTube site called Awaken with JP. And he's a comedian, okay? So he does everything from a comedic perspective. But the things that he talks about are very, very, very serious. He's more ironically humorous than he's a comic. I want you to listen to just a couple of minutes of this clip called A Communist Christmas from a YouTube channel called Awaken with JP. Take a listen.
Hi there, obedient person. This year for the holidays, you'll get to enjoy some special restrictions to help you replace the Christmas spirit with the spirit of communism. It's beginning to look a lot like communism everywhere you go. This Christmas, it's not that you can't enjoy your family, it's just that you get to enjoy your family in different ways. The ways that we tell you you can enjoy your own family. I'm not coming home this year, Mom. I've been ordered to stay at home. I probably won't see you before you die. Merry Christmas. That felt good. It's enjoyable to do my part. Your year of dedicated obedience to tyrannical governors is helping replace the normal joy of the holiday spirit with the increased joy of lockdown-related blessings, like increased depression, suicides, child abuse, domestic abuse, overdoses, unemployment, bankruptcies, and starvation. You should be proud of your obedience because it helped you contribute to these things. Warms my heart. Furthermore, this year, the holidays are just going to be different. Instead of getting together with your friends and family in person and risking the transmission of joy, love, and connection, you are to practice socialism distancing. 'Tis the season to have unconstitutional authoritarian rules dictate what you can do. Would you like to be told you can't leave your own home, told what you can and cannot do in your own home, and told that you can't celebrate Christmas? Well, this year, You are being told these things. And you can do all your holiday shopping nationally with Amazon, as all local businesses have been exterminated. But in reality, you probably don't have any more money left to tithe to Amazon, as we've helped you achieve poverty/social equality. So instead of exchanging gifts, exchange glances of hunger pains with your loved ones, because you don't have money to buy food either. Ooh, looks like you'll need more government because of what the government did to you, so you can have some government handouts. Be sure to keep voting communism/blue in the next election so we can continue protecting you from what we're doing to you. In exchange for your vote, we'll let you think your vote counts. Hey kids, you're in luck, because the world's most trusted doctor has personally given Santa the shot. So if you don't get any presents, it's either because Santa's having an adverse reaction, or it's because your parents were obedient enough to protect your family from income this year. Just look at this lovely holiday photo of my family and I enjoying the communism holiday. Put a mask on that kid now. Now that's better than how it used to be, isn't it? AOC's making a blacklist and she's checking it twice. Wouldn't it be a grand holiday treat if she can get all Trump supporters thrown in prison/concentration camps? That way our democracy would be completely protected from freedom. For a number of years now, we've made it socially illegal for you to say Merry Christmas. We've exchanged it with Happy Holidays, and you went with it. Thank you for helping our efforts to erase religion, because you can't have communism with freedom of religion. We wouldn't want people following the Lord's guidance over our guidance. Oh yeah, and all churches are closed for the foreseeable future. I love a good coincidence.
And then the 3 wise men greeted baby Jesus.
I don't think we need to hear any more about that guy. But would you like to hear more about how your government is great and protects you? Well, they've scared you, so you're scared, and now they're protecting you from what they told you to be scared of. And that makes them great and trustworthy. And it's communism.
Wait, communism? But I thought all these restrictions were about a virus.
Sure they are. This year, don't leave your home, don't gather, wear a mask, and there will be no dancing and no singing, because it's not safe. However, what is allowed is fear, obedience, isolation, poverty, and therefore a growing dependency on your government. Because that all seems safe. And it would also be great if you could pretend that this year's restrictions are just going to be for this year. Because, of course, we'll be glad to hand you your freedoms back after we've taken them. So for the holidays, please keep being obedient and handing us your freedoms. You're doing a great job of doing your part. As your supreme leaders, we wish you a very Merry Communist Christmas.
So that was the YouTube channel Awaken with JP. And I think I'm going to add him to our list of recommended sites that we released the other day. Because when you listen to his stuff, again, he's a humorist, he's a comedian, but Will Rogers in the 1920s and 30s, he was a humorist as well. But he said things humorously about very, very serious topics. And so the next thing that I want to point your attention to, I just put a link into the chat room for Anthony Fauci being vaccinated on live TV, and you could see very clearly that the injection site was in his left arm. And yet just a few hours later, when he was asked how he felt, and he was being interviewed on CBS, he said, "I feel fine," and he tapped his arm and said, "My arm is still a little sore, but other than that, there's no side effects." The only problem is when he was tapping his arm and looking into the camera and saying how sore his arm was at the injection site, he was tapping the wrong arm. Now, I have to ask you this question. If you had just received a vaccination in your arm and you were saying that there's soreness and tenderness around the injection site, and somebody was asking you if your arm hurt, would you, for any reason, would you tap the wrong arm? And would you say that it feels fine? Wouldn't you know that you were tapping the wrong arm? And on top of that, You're using the arm that you claim is suffering soreness from the injection. That's the arm that you're tapping the wrong arm with. So how stupid do you have to be to believe any of the things that were being shown? You really have to be intentionally stupid. Now, I want to bring your attention to something called the Biderman chart of coercion. Decades ago, there was a sociologist by the name of Albert D. Biderman. And Albert D. Biderman came up with something called his chart of coercion. And in this chart, and I just lost it. Okay, here it is. And in this chart, sociologist Albert Biderman, he came up with the different steps that if somebody was being tortured, okay, if you have a prisoner of war or you have a war crimes criminal or you've kidnapped somebody. I remember back in the 1970s, there was this very famous kidnapping of Patty Hearst, and she was the granddaughter of William Randolph Hearst, and she was captured by a group called the SLA, the Sudanese Liberation Army, and they supposedly put her through mental torture, and then she wound up falling in love with her captor. I think that's called Stockholm Syndrome or Helsinki Syndrome, one of those. And it was a whole big thing, and it was in all the headlines of the newspapers. Patty Hearst was kidnapped by a terrorist group, and they brainwashed her. Well, this sociologist, Albert D. Biderman, decades ago, he put pen to paper, and he came up with the methods that people use to brainwash other people, and then he talked about the effects of those methods. At the very top of his list, Biderman talks about isolation. So the first thing, if you're going to brainwash somebody, the very first thing that you have to do is you have to lock them down. You have to isolate these people. And that's what he said was the very first step in mental coercion, or what we call brainwashing. The first thing that you had to do is you had to isolate the person. That deprives the victim of all social support, of their ability to resist, and it develops an intense concern with themselves. And the end result is it makes the victim dependent on the person who has put them into isolation. The second thing that Biderman talked about was the monopolization of perception. And what this is it makes the person who is being locked down, who is being isolated, a monopolization of perception forces that person to become fixated on their immediate prediction. It eliminates information not in compliance with demand. So the first step is they isolate you. The second thing is they conduct themselves in such a way that your attention is fixated on what your predicament is. The third step in Biderman's chart of coercion is humiliation and degradation. And they do this because it makes resistance more costly than compliance. Now, what are some of the ways in Guantanamo Bay when we captured those supposed Muslim terrorists and we kept them there for years without a trial and years without being able to speak with a lawyer? What did we do to those people? Have you ever seen the videos and the pictures that they were locked down in chains and handcuffs, and they were made to walk on their hands and knees, and they put masks on every single one of those people? Why do they put a mask on you? It is a sign of humiliation and degradation. That's why in Islam, they make all the women cover up their face. It's not because they're so insanely beautiful that their ravishing beauty would force random strange men to lunge at them and rape them as they walk down the city street. No, the reason why Muslim men demand that their women wear a mask, whatever you want to call it a burqa or whatever it is, it's a mask. Why do they make you wear a mask? Because that's the third point of Biderman's chart of coercion. They have to humiliate you and they have to degrade you. I met somebody yesterday for coffee and they had a mask on, and when they walked into the coffee shop, I didn't recognize them. And the only part of their face that was covered up was their nose, their mouth, and their chin. And this is somebody that was a friend of mine, and I literally did not recognize that person. And so this is why they make you wear a mask. They make you wear a mask because it is a humiliating and degrading thing. You may remember the article that we did just a couple of weeks ago, and we told you about a 2019 episode of a TV program called Fashion Runway, Project Runway, and the designer's name is COVID, K-O-V-I-D, Kapoor. So COVID Kapoor, on this TV show Project Runway in 2019, designs an outfit that the main feature of the outfit is an accessorized fashion mask where only the model's top of their head and their eyes are visible. And that fashion model's name was COVID, K-O-V-I-D. And then somebody did the math, and they found out that exactly 33 weeks and 3 days after this episode of Project Runway aired, with a fashion mask by a designer whose name was COVID with a K, 33 weeks and 3 days later, the first reported case of COVID-19 with a C, was recorded. So, what are the chances of that being a coincidence or that being an accident? There's no chance at all. And this is how predictive programming works, and this is what these people do. Let's continue with a few more items on Biderman's chart of coercion. So the first step is isolation. Second step, they monopolize your perception. The third step is humiliation and degradation. Now, at this point, the fourth step is executed, and that step is exhaustion. They have locked you down. They have done all these different things, and now your ability, your mental and physical ability to resist now plummets. And while they have you in that weakened state, the next thing that they do is they threaten you. Why do they threaten you? Because threats create anxiety and despair. And in those threats, they tell you the cost of non-compliance. Isolation, monopolization of perception, humiliation, degradation, exhaustion, threats. The next step is occasional indulgences. And they do this because this is how they retain you, is they give you a little treat from time to time. They throw you a little bit of a bone. So you're confused. You don't know whether to fear these people, or you don't know whether these people are actually trying to help you. You are confused. The angel of death in Auschwitz, Dr. Joseph Mengele, he was talking with some of his victims one day, and he was astonished that they never seemed to figure out why they were really in the concentration camp. And they never really seemed to figure out that all the brutal and inhumane and nightmarish treatment that the concentration camp people, mostly Jewish people, 50% of all concentration camp people were Jewish people. And this doctor, Dr. Joseph Mengele, he was astonished that they just kept taking it. And the more that they dished out, the more the Jews just meekly went to their slaughter. And so he's talking with these twin girls. He loved to do experiments, these brutal, sadistic chemical and medical experiments on twins. And he's talking with this pair of twins one day, and he looks at them and he says, "You Jewish people really amaze me." And the one girl said, "How so?" He said, "Because the more that we do to you, the less that you think it's us doing it, and the more you just keep coming back." And the reason for that is isolation, monopolization of perception, humiliation and degradation, exhaustion, threats, occasional indulgence. The second to last step is called demonstrating omnipotence. They lock you down. They take away your ability to make money. They do whatever needs to be done. And they do this so that you know who the boss is. And there's no getting around that. They demonstrate that they have complete and total power over you. And then the last thing that they make you do is they force upon you trivial demands. So these are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 steps in Biderman's chart of coercion. Now, I want you to think about that. Step number 1, isolation. What happened on March 18th of 2020? They stood up in front of the cameras and said that we need 15 days to flatten the curve. 15 days to flatten the curve. That was about 260 days ago. All right, so the very first thing that any government anywhere in the world did is they isolated their people. The next thing that happened is they began to tell you exactly what it was that you were seeing. They made you terrified of a virus. Now, the world is filled with viruses. I'm not saying that COVID-19 is a fake virus. It's not. It may or may not have been created in a laboratory. It may or may not be a naturally occurring virus from the wild. But it's not fake. It's real. People die from it. People get sick with it. People have been hospitalized with it. There's no question about it. But after they isolated us back on March 18th, with the 15 days to flatten the curve, which is now 260 days, then they monopolized our perception. And all day, every day, what did they do? Endless news reports, sometimes very broad, sometimes very minute and focused. And all anybody began to talk about was COVID, COVID, COVID. They monopolized our perception. What's the third thing that happened with COVID-19? Everybody was told that they had to wear a mask. Certain parts of the country were told that they were on lockdown and they couldn't leave their homes. And the Constitution was absolutely suspended. There is no question about that. And our everyday freedoms here in America were taken away, but not just in America. The headline on Breitbart right now is, and I just clicked right past it, California has worst coronavirus outbreak in the United States, but they also have some of the toughest restrictions. California is now reporting the highest number of new daily COVID cases, but they are also the state with the largest number of restrictions. Israel is on lockdown. The UK is on lockdown. And so what's happening? You go down the chart of Biden's chart of coercion, and this is what you find. This is exactly what they are doing. I said Biden's chart. It's Biderman's chart of coercion. And then what set in after those first 3 steps were enacted? Exhaustion. How many people do you know that are absolutely wore out with thinking about the virus, thinking about how they're going to pay their bills, thinking about if they're still going to have a job, thinking about which family member is going to get it next. People are exhausted. They are absolutely exhausted. Next step, threats. Over Christmas in New York City and Pennsylvania and Washington and Oregon and all these different Democrat-run states constantly threatening their people. Don't go out. Don't leave the house. Everybody's on lockdown. So when you look at this chart, this Biderman's chart of coercion, you see an absolute blueprint for what's been taking place over the last 9 months in 2020. And the shocking part of all that is only the warm-up for what's coming in 2021. And that's why that clip that I played for you from JP, A Communist Christmas. In fact, let me just play the last minute or so of this clip so we can hear how the clip ends.
I like the taste of communism. One more thing, I want to thank the sponsor of this video, Magnesium Breakthrough by Bioptimizers. Now,
well, I guess there was no more clip. That was the commercial part of the broadcast, and we don't need to hear that. But I think that really proves the point that these things are happening, and none of this is an accident. None of this is a coincidence. Tony Fauci saying that he had vaccinated Santa Claus, and then just a few days later, he pretends to be vaccinated. He taps the wrong arm. And all these things, it goes back to Barney Miller. It goes back to before Barney Miller. The second person that was mentioned in that clip, the Barney Miller clip, was a man by the name of David Rockefeller. David Rockefeller said this about the Bilderberg meetings. We are grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time Magazine, and other great publications whose directors have attended our meetings. He's talking about Bilderberger meetings, and respected their promises of discretion for almost 40 years. It would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we had been subjected to the lights of publicity during those years. But the world is more sophisticated and prepared to march toward a world government. So at the same time that people were laughing at Barney Miller and laughing at something called the Trilateral Commission and David Rockefeller and George H.W. Bush, David Rockefeller was attending Bilderberger meetings, running and financing Bilderberger meetings, and then thanking the fake news media of his day for attending the meetings and then not telling anybody about what those meetings talked about. And then he said that world government was absolutely coming. It was absolutely planned. He said this. He said, we are part of a secret cabal working against the best interests of the United States. If that's what you're charging me with, David Rockefeller said 40 years ago, he said, if you're charging me that me and my family and my friends and my associates are part of a secret cabal working against the best interests of the United States, if that's the charge, I stand guilty and I am proud of it. So these things have been going on since the dawn of the 20th century. 1913, always watch out for the number 13. In the Bible, that is the biblical number of rebellion. And in 1913, they created something called the Federal Reserve. It is not part of the federal government, and they have no reserves. What is the Federal Reserve? The Federal Reserve is a not non-constitutional, an unconstitutional board of private bankers who control the printing of money in the United States, and they set the financial boundaries of how this country can operate. And we've told you for years now about the Federal Reserve Act. We even told you that the Titanic, it is highly likely that one of the main reasons why the Titanic was intentionally sunk was to kill a man by the name of J.P. Morgan. We all know who J.P. Morgan is. And he was on that. There were a lot of people who were on the Titanic when it went down in 1912. And J.P. Morgan was one of those people that he was opposed to what was happening in the United States. And they couldn't create the Federal Reserve without him. Now, is it true that the Titanic was sunk to get rid of wealthy businessmen who were opposed to the construction of the Federal Reserve? I don't know. But I do know this. I do know that on February 17th, 1950, James Paul Warburg, speaking before the U.S. Senate Subcommittee on the Revision of the United Nations Charter, he said this: "We will have world government, whether we like it or not. The only question is whether world government will be achieved by conquest or by consent." So, was the Titanic sunk intentionally to get rid of J.P. Morgan? Did you know that J.P. Morgan had so much money and so much power at the turn of the 20th century that he actually loaned the United States government money to keep the government floating during a financial crisis? When I was in school, we used to read about people like Morgan and Mellon and Rockefeller and Carnegie, and they were called the robber barons. And they were called the robber barons for their ruthless and scheming ways that they used to create their vast wealth and empires. One of the companies that J.P. Morgan owned was called the International Mercantile Marine Company, which in turn purchased the White Star Line that built two very large luxury ships. One of them was called the Olympic, and one of them was called the Titanic. So do your own research on why the Titanic went down. And when you do that research, talking about 19th century predictive programming, in 1898, there was a book about the sinking of a ship called the Titan. And this book, The Sinking of the Titan, sounded very much like the Titanic. It was the largest ship of its day. It was claimed to be unsinkable. All that in an 1898 novel. A massive ship called the Titan, and in this novel, it was called Unsinkable. And would you like to guess how the fictional Titan ship sunk? It sunk when it hit an iceberg. What time of year did this book, The Wreck of the Titan, what time of year did this ship, this unsinkable ship, hit the iceberg? It hit it right in the middle of April. Both these ships, the fictional ship and the real ship, were capable of speeds over 20 knots, which was unheard of in 1898. The fictional Titan did not have enough lifeboats to serve its passengers, and neither did the Titanic, the real boat, because they were removed before the ship set sail. Did the New World Order broadcast their plans 14 years before carrying them out? Did J.P. Morgan deliberately sink the Titanic in 1912 to ensure the passage of the Federal Reserve Act in 1913? Before you answer that, consider this. During the recession of 2008 to 2011, President Barack Obama declared that Wall Street and the banking giants were too big to fail and authorized $200 billion in loans to be given to them, while millions of average Americans were allowed to lose their homes. And who was at the top of the list that received the bailout? J.P. Morgan Chase. Wall Street and banks were not allowed to go under because Wall Street and the banks control the Federal Reserve. So what did they do? They simply printed fake money and loaned it to themselves and magically wiped away their losses. Now, you might say to me, that's 2008. That has nothing to do with 2020. That has everything to do with 2020. Have you been following what's been going on with the $2.3 trillion bailout? And they only want to give $600 to selected Americans. What's happening to the other $1.4 trillion of that bailout? Why is hundreds of millions of dollars going to foreign countries? Why are Americans being allowed to lose their homes and lose their jobs? It's a different type of bailout, but it's no different than what Obama did. It's the same thing. And this is how you affect change in countries. This is why at the end of the Roaring '20s, you had the stock market crash, it happened in America, but it was globalized. All of Europe was affected by the crash of 1929. And this is how they affect change. So what happened in Europe? The stock market crashed and everybody's money became worthless. I have seen tons of videos and movies about people with wheelbarrows filled with paper money that's become worthless. And they need thousands of dollars to purchase a loaf of bread because their paper money has become worthless. And that's exactly what we're heading into right now. And this is why all this global change is going on and all these different things. Have you ever looked in the book of Joshua? Have you ever looked in Joshua chapter 6 and looked down in verse 24? Joshua 6:24. And they burnt the city with fire, and all that was therein, only the silver and the gold, and the vessels of brass and of iron, they put into the treasury of the house of the Lord. What's the purest form of gold that you can have? 24-karat gold. Joshua 6:24 talks about the silver, the gold, the vessels of brass being put into the treasury of the house of the Lord. And everything that's happening right now, and everything that's going to be happening in 2021, is this part of a global plan, of a global cabal? David Rockefeller said it was. David Rockefeller is such a mover and a shaker that the writers of Barney Miller in 1981 write him and George Bush into one of their programs. And what do? They use Rockefeller and Bush to make conspiracy theory people who are after the truth, make them look like insane people, make them look like nutcases. Now, one more thing that I want to talk about before our time comes to an end today. On this website, the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health and Center for Health Security, on March 5th of 2020, this was posted. Do you remember that we told you about Event 201? And we told you that this thing was coming months and months before the COVID outbreak took place. And we told you about Event 201 and what it was a pandemic planning exercise funded by the Bill Gates Foundation. Well, they're working on the second one. This one is called the SPARS Pandemic of 2025 and 2028. So they have had such a great success with Event 201. They are now moving into something called the SPARS Pandemic of 2025-2028. So they are not running out of things to talk about. They are not running out of tricks and plans. They have so much more up their sleeve than you could ever begin to possibly imagine. Here's a headline for you. The nation of Spain they have created a registry for people who refuse to take the COVID vaccine. Imagine that. The nation of Spain is now creating a registry for people who don't want to take the vaccine. People like me and you. The news was in the air for days. Now it's official. In Spain, there will be a register of people who refuse the COVID vaccine. The vaccine will not be mandatory, says Health Minister Salvador Illa, but whoever decides not to be vaccinated must be included in an official federal register, which will then be shared with other European communities. The document, another clarification of the minister, quote, will not be public, end quote, and will be compiled, quote, in full respect of privacy, end quote. But the fact that it will be shared with other European countries may lead to a ban on travel for those who refuse the drug, not to mention the fact that Spain's decision will pave the way for similar measures in other European countries. So, it's already begun. This is what's happening. They're not going to force you to take the vaccine, but they're going to put your name on a list. And once your name is on that list, guess what you won't be able to do? You won't be able to travel. You won't be able to leave your country. You won't be able to go to a different country. Why? Because your name is on the blacklist. Are they going to make you take that vaccine? No, not going to make you take it. But what they're going to do is they're going to apply Biderman's chart of coercion, and they're going to run these steps until you have a mental breakdown and you either die or you take the vaccine. But are they going to make you take it? Well, not directly, but absolutely indirectly. And here's a fun fact. A 75-year-old man in Israel, he just made history last week. How did he make history? He became the first person to die directly after receiving a COVID-19 vaccine. So this man in Israel, a 75-year-old man, is the first person to die. He had a heart attack 2 hours after receiving the vaccine. And when you add that to the 3,150 adverse reactions in just the first week alone that the CDC reported from the UK, I think you're beginning to see the story. And now you see why there is such a rush to get you to take this vaccine. They want you to be injected before you figure out exactly what it's going to do to you. What is it going to do to you? Nothing good. It is going to hurt you in a variety of ways that will take months and maybe even years before it's finally brought to light how dangerous this vaccine is. Is it the mark of the beast? No, it's not the mark of the beast. Does it lead you to the mark of the beast? It absolutely does. There's no question about it. So the countdown has begun. The process has started. Here's another fun fact for you. In 2020, Forbes just did an article, and they invite you to meet the 50 doctors, scientists, and healthcare entrepreneurs who magically became billionaires in 2020. Isn't that interesting? 50 billionaires in the healthcare field in 2020. I wonder how that happened. Well, I think you know how that happened. All these drug companies are making billions and billions and billions of dollars worth of profit. And they are going to continue to enrich themselves as more and more Americans and people in other nations, in Europe, in Ireland, all over the place, are being locked down in record numbers. 50 healthcare billionaires that were created in the year 2020. Remember all that talk about how they're willing to, all these pharmaceutical companies, they're going to sell these vaccines they're going to sell it at cost. They just want to help sick and suffering people. Guess what? The vaccine has only been released for 2 weeks, and already every single pharmaceutical company that is providing vaccines are promoting record profits. 50 healthcare billionaires in just this year, while everybody else is struggling and people are losing their jobs, and food lines in places like New Jersey and Chicago and Seattle and all these different places, lines of people around the block at food banks, and yet we have 50 healthcare billionaires. We have pharmaceutical companies posting record profits, and that record is going to continue to grow. And as that record grows, the lockdowns are going to get more and more frequent. They're going to get more and more severe. You're going to have less and less freedom. And the only way that you're going to be able to get down of this siege mentality, the only way that they're going to let you out of the COVID cyber bunker, is you've got to take that vaccine. If you don't take the vaccine, it's not going to stop. And that's exactly what Biderman's chart of coercion says, is that you do these things to these people and you don't stop and you're relentless. And the end result is you have changed how their brain works. Are they going to force you to take the vaccine? No. But what they are going to do is they're going to brainwash you. And if you're not careful, you'll begin to believe their propaganda, and you'll begin to believe the unbelievable lies and contradictions. You're going to think that, yes, it's normal that Anthony Fauci would get vaccinated in his left arm, and hours later, talking about the soreness of the injection site, he's going to mistakenly tap his right arm while he's on live television, where they can't edit that out. This is how it's going. And guess what? Their plan is actually working to a very high degree. They are actually very successful so far. In fact, they are more successful than they ever imagined that they would be. Whatever happened to the Patriot Uprising? It didn't. There is no Patriot Uprising. On January 6th, there's going to be another rally in Washington, D.C., and all it's going to be is a rally. It's not going to change anything. Trump's case is not going to be heard by the U.S. Supreme Court. He has been abandoned by his own party. And why? Well, now is their hour and the power of darkness. These things are the things that have to happen. Estevic just said they have a very good long game. That's exactly right. And the American people are too complacent. And not just here in America, all over Europe, all over Asia, people don't want to be deprived of their economic necessities, their financial necessities. They are more concerned about the food on the table than they are about armed guards giving them a COVID-19 vaccine, like what has already begun to happen in the state of Ohio. And people will do anything. What does it say in Job chapter 1, where Satan is talking with God and talking about Job? Job 2, not Job 1. Job 2:4. And Satan answered the Lord and said, skin for skin, yea, all that a man hath will he give for his life. And that's what we're doing. We are not fighting back. We are not rising up. They are telling us to wear a cloth mask when we walk into the restaurant because they don't want to spread the virus. But magically, you can take the cloth mask off when you get to the table. You can sit at the table with 60, 70, 80 other people. You can have your meal. You can laugh and talk and joke and cough and sneeze. But then when you have to leave the restaurant, they make you put your mask back on because they don't want you spreading the germs. Do you see how stupid that is? Do you see that the mere fact that they let you take the mask off when you sit down, if any of those people are sick with anything, now the entire room has become contaminated. But they want you to believe something that is a patent lie. They want you to believe something that is false. And why do they do that? It has nothing to do with what the actual lie is. It is conditioning you to have you believe what they tell you without question and without pushing back. So, what do? They concoct this absolute act of stupidity, and they tell you with a straight face that you put the mask on when you walk into the restaurant, you sit down at the table, you can take the mask off, you can be in a room filled with people who aren't wearing a mask, and then you put the mask back on when you leave the restaurant, and that's going to keep everybody safe from a communicable virus. That's not science. That's not biology. That's not logic. That's not even common sense. But look deeper. Think about the Biderman chart of coercion. It is not about the lie. It is getting you to believe a lie without question. And that's what the plan is. And now you know the truth about the Tennessee bombing on Christmas Day. Now you know the truth about 9/11. Now you know the truth about the Kennedy assassination and why they killed Lee Harvey Oswald and Harry Ruby and J.D. Tippit. Why all those people were murdered so the truth could never come out. But the truth did come out. And that's what's behind everything. So, I want you to think about all these things as we get ready to go into 2021. Because everything that's taken place in this year was simply a warm-up to get you in the right frame of mind to bring in 2021. And that's going to be the year that America is pulled down to the ground and every other country with it. And with that, we're out of time. Thank you so much for attending this last weekly podcast of 2020. I hope that you will join us on New Year's Eve from 10 to midnight Eastern Standard Time. And we're going to have the Prophecy Roundup, and we're going to look at what might be coming in 2021. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Have a great week, everybody.
I imagine that right now you're feeling a bit like Alice. Tumbling down the rabbit hole?
You could say that.
I can see it in your eyes. You have the look of a man who accepts what he sees because he is expecting to wake up. Ironically, this is not far from the truth. Do you believe in fate, Neil?
No.
Why not?
Because I don't like the idea that I'm not in control of my life.
I know exactly what you mean. Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life, that there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad. It is this feeling that has brought you to me. Do you know what I'm talking about?
The Matrix.
Do you want to know what it is? The Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us. Even now, in this very room. You can see it when you look out your window or when you turn on your television. You can feel it when you go to work, when you go to church, when you pay your taxes. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth.
What truth?
That you are a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage, born into a prison that you cannot smell or taste or touch. A prison for your mind. Unfortunately, no one can be told what the Matrix is. You have to see it for yourself. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.